All right, I'd like to call to order this work session at 5:30 p.m. on October 22nd. We are here today to talk about the OSAS and benchmark work session data. I'm going to turn it over to Arturo.
Yeah, I'll kick us off and we'll pitch it right back to you. So tonight we are going to spend a bit of time engaging with our data. As we discussed at one of our more recent board meetings, the OSAS results came out, not all of them. We're waiting for graduation data. The data, as we are used to seeing it displayed by the state, is not yet available. The state is revamping their reporting visuals. So that probably won't be available for another couple of months, but we do have some data available to us. So we'll take a look at that. We also want to take a look at some local data because those OSAS results matter, but they're not the whole picture. So we're going to layer on top of that some additional metrics that will help shape the health of the district overall. But where I'm going to start, if we'll who's running this? Thank you, Arturo. If we'll transition there. So as we just start the discussion tonight, just want to bring us back to these journey of the graduate attributes. You'll notice these attributes are a lot more of what we would call qualitative. They're things like collaboration, it's communication, it's empathy, because those are the life skills that we want our kids to lead with, and those are also the skills that are necessary to be successful students. They have to have both. So grounding our work in this graphic is really important for us as we have the larger conversation around what do our metrics tell us about academics, and then how do we shape the whole picture of how students are doing in our system. So we're going to ground our effort in this. And with that, I'm going to turn it back over to you.
Great, thank you. So coming around, if you would grab a copy and pass it down. What we hope to accomplish tonight is to take a little bit of a different approach in looking at the data. Traditionally, we have come to you through the modes of a presentation, right? We present to you, you need some more? One more, pass it down. Yeah. So traditionally, we come to you through a presentation where we shared the data, shared slides, and then gave you then allowed opportunity for questions and comments throughout the presentation and at the end. Today, we wanted to have a working session so that we can have some dialogue and discussion about what OSAS and local benchmark data mean. Beyond just what we talked about, Dr. West shared with us the journey of graduate attributes, we also wanted to ground us in these key academic achievement indicators that were presented to you earlier this year. And this is a guiding document for us that we will update continuously. We just updated it on the most recent OSAS data. In the winter, we'll have graduation rates, as Dr. West mentioned, and we'll update those as well. So this is very important to us, right? This is something we're going to update and see the trends over time that we'll be bringing to you over and over again. And so I wanted to remind us about this. Okay, and so that's an important piece for our system as well. Today, we're going to allow for some discussion. We really want to hear from the board about some of your perspectives around state testing and local benchmark testing. And then we're going to show you data that looks a little bit different than the normal bar graph that we've traditionally seen. Because we think it's pretty interesting to begin to look at them in different ways, including cohort data, which this board has asked for in the past, and so has some administrators, so we're bringing that to you tonight. So we're going to take a little bit of a different approach to the conversation around data and where we're at with OSAS and benchmark data. Okay? Going the wrong way. So a couple of things that we wanted to kind of share with you is we talk a lot about leading and lagging indicators. Leading indicators being those in which will produce outcomes, right? So for example, evidence of professional growth, so teachers involved in professional learning, implementing new curriculum. Those are all leading indicators that we hope over time, if we do it well, and if we monitor implementation, will lead to positive outcomes for student learning, right? Same thing can be said for classroom student learning data. What's happening day to day, and how are we adjusting our instruction based on what we're seeing kids being able to do in the classroom, or in PLCs. Similarly, SEL student survey data. That's something that we monitor throughout the year in hopes that it produces outcomes at the end, right? And our local benchmark assessments are also a big part of those leading indicators. And we know we've introduced in the last couple of years M-Class, Lectura, MAPS, and now we have a new tool for our English language learners, right? Those didn't exist in our system before 2 years ago, right? That's been a major overhaul in our system. And what that's allowed us to do is to streamline to using just those assessment tools, because prior to that, we had a variety, different buildings were doing different things. And then we were trying to compare leading indicators, and it was virtually impossible. So we've streamlined, we've invested a lot as a district in improving our leading indicators and tightening up our leading indicators, okay? And this is really where we were putting our weight behind, right? If we put our weight behind monitoring student learning data, if we put our weight behind local benchmark SEL data, we feel like that's where we need to live in order to produce better outcomes for students. Lagging indicators are what we traditionally know as the state assessment, OSAS, grad rates, dropout rates, end of year grades. Those are the product of a lot of work throughout the year, right? And OSAS is a lagging indicator, okay? So I just wanted to share this because this is a topic of conversation. This is what we talked about with principals. And actually more recently, we even talked about with TOSAs and with deans and APs about where are we spending our time and how are we getting ahead of it, ahead of the conversations, and not just reacting to lagging indicators, okay? So I share that because we love to have a conversation, open up the conversation with board members tonight around our feelings and thoughts around state assessments and local benchmark assessments. We really don't have enough, we really traditionally haven't had enough time to have this discussion during a presentation. And we just felt like it'd be really good for us to have a discussion as a board. And so the first question that I love to open up conversations about is, what is the purpose of OSAS state assessments in your mind? As a board member, what is the purpose of OSAS state assessments?
May I
Please.
add something to, there's no right answer.
Yeah.
So this isn't a gotcha.
This isn't a test.
It's not a test. We really are curious about the conversation because what we believe about this assessment and then the second question helps to inform the way we respond to these metrics. So no right answer here, it's truly research.
I'll start.
I kind of had a feeling.
Yeah.
Mark?
I don't know what the purpose of the OSAS is. I think that 5 years ago, 10 years ago, 8 years ago, there might have been a better purpose for it, but I don't know anymore because, I said this at the last board meeting, you just look around at different districts and when you look at their scores, they're red. And they're red because they didn't have 90% or 88 to 90% of the students take it. And so more opting out, and, so I don't know anymore. I used to look at them when I was a principal way more than I did now. And the banks, they were really good. They were always very good. But now I just don't know what the purpose of them is.
Isn't it a comparison from state to state, the smart balance test, no?
No, a little bit of context. About a decade ago, most states signed on to the Smart Balance assessment. Since then, states have diverged from that and created their own. Oregon is one of those, which is why we use the acronym OSAS now instead of Smarter Balance Assessment, because we don't use that same assessment any longer. So it's not a state-to-state comparison because state standards differ across the nation. It is a district-to-district comparison within the state of Oregon. And that is how the state uses it, to be able to say that the students in Forest Grove graduate at this rate, whereas the students in Banks graduate at this other rate.
So how does that help our instruction?
That is the conversation.
And what does it cost? See, that's my issue, is the cost of it. And you have to take a certain amount of time to implement the test. That's lost instruction in the classroom, from my perception. And it doesn't give the feedback to that classroom teacher that school year to help the instruction of the student. So I don't see the value of it unless somebody can convince me otherwise. What I see is a lost instruction, and it's costly.
It's become also, I was pretty deep into this years ago. You would publicly, newspapers, local papers, going in Oregon against other states. But if you dive deep into that, at least what I did years ago, the standards of different states are different.
Yeah.
And so that's what I would always say, was that you're comparing apples and oranges, you can't. But it's splashed everywhere that Oregon doesn't do well in the state, and I think it's smart balance. And it's just, to me, I just don't think it's the best metric of how our students are doing. I just don't. I don't know what another one is. We'll see about local assessments, but I just don't, I don't have much faith. That's what I would say.
So I would agree with Mark. I mean, just knowing the history of this whole train ride, I mean, the thought was that there would be some continuity within the states, and there would be some continuity within the district, and the state would be able to evaluate the effectiveness of the districts, and it just didn't pan out. And in the last 3 to 5 years, anyway, it's gotten worse. So, and again, it's a lagging indicator. And it doesn't give us what we need for instruction. And I agree with Kate that we've had these discussions before about the amount of time instruction time it takes from the classroom and the teacher time. So, I mean, at one point we had discussions about using it as an evaluation tool for teachers. So we were just in a different place. So I think we're in a better place now. I think we've made the move. And I completely agree with Mark and Kate about the purpose of the test and the deficits that we see right now.
I have another comment. I don't know if the results that we're seeing are valid, because this is a test where the kids can opt out, right? So, I don't even think the numbers are indicator of where our kids are.
And that's a conversation taking place at the state as well, with so many opt-outs. We have a system that we've designed in this state where we require a thing, but then say you don't have to do the thing. And so many families choose for their students, for them to not take the assessment. The one thing we haven't said in terms of the purpose of OSAS is it does meet a federal requirement. So while there are lots of problems with OSAS as it sits right now, in order for us to access federal money, we must administer an assessment that evaluates the things that the different OSAS measurements do evaluate. So I don't know that we're at a point without cooperation from the federal government where we can completely eliminate the assessment, where, to say it bluntly, we're stuck with it. But that said, there is context that we can wrap around it, given what we know about its effectiveness, what it tells us, its validity, its reliability. That's the conversation.
I think I would add then to Mark's comment about what are the alternatives, and then Kate, you mentioned something that we hear all the time from teachers, which is it just sucks up so much instructional time. It's one more thing. So if it wasn't there, with existing ways that we're, and is it looking at something where we look at existing things we're already doing for assessment, being able to take those pieces and meet that federal requirement? Do districts have the ability to do that on their own? So no. Okay.
Unfortunately, no, but I will say, we are starting conversations about how and when we administer the OSAS in the fall and the spring. You know, it's a double-edged sword, right? Because you feel this is public and you want to be able to give it its justice and due importance. But we have examples in our system where it could last multiple weeks. And how do we relook at that? Do we really want to spend multiple weeks on this assessment rather than the benchmark assessments, which we'll talk about next? So know that we're having those conversations so we can get it in a healthier place, because it's there. We need to do it, and we need to do it well, but we also don't want to put all our eggs in that basket and swap the system out, which it is right now.
Are other districts having the same kind of questions that we're having about this?
Yes, to greater or lesser degrees. If you look across the state, I think it is safe to say that outcomes on each of the OSAS measurements you can predict based on SES for the district by March. So a district with a higher SES tends to put more weight, for example, on the assessments because their students tend to do better. And that is something that they can herald when they're marketing their district. Districts that have different SES tend to have outcomes that are lower. And I heard recently that in conversations with some of our community members, they're really happy with their schools, but then they see a newspaper article that says Forest Grove isn't doing so great with these assessment results, and so they ask questions about, is the school really good? But I'm so happy with my teacher. And so there's this contradiction that we are constantly balancing as a district with what people see from the outside versus what they experience on the inside.
Pretty.
So the next question is, what is the purpose of local benchmark assessments?
Purpose of the benchmark assessments is basically to be able to quantify learning around the curriculum. So, and those benchmark assessments give us an idea where kids are in terms of their progress in the classroom. I would say that those benchmark assessments are a key component of most successful classrooms. And so if you were going to, me personally, if I was going to plus or minus, I'd take the benchmark assessment over the other assessment, just because it really guides your instruction. So
I think that guiding the instructions is the key, right?
yeah, I do. But
Absolutely. Good thoughts? Again, not a trick question. We just felt like it was an opportunity for us to kind of live in this conversation a little longer, so that as we present data moving forward, when we talk about benchmark assessments, we really know what it's rooted in.
I'd be curious to know the level of, I don't know if trust is the right word, that people, our community, our teaching staff, our district itself has in these different types of assessments. So if there is more value in, I guess, buy-in, because it's local, is why, teasing out what is it about that is that? Because I think there's a point where we're hearing this in the accountability work group, is that there's a little bit of a shift of like, testing results don't, we know the testing result by itself doesn't give you the total picture of where kids are, but it's also true that those testing results do show trend lines that you match, and so it's that balance of being able to communicate that this isn't showing everything we need, but I'm wondering if the local ones give us a bigger opportunity to share, where we need to make changes, and I think that's, maybe you can do that more when you have local assessment that people trust, but I don't know if we gauge, I know some teachers, when they're giving the assessments, actually really, there's different levels of how teachers see those assessments and what their experiences have been administering. So the question of, do we all feel like we understand the value of whatever it is we're giving for assessment? And I think some of the pushback has just been the time factor has made everybody be like, I just need to teach. So that would be maybe the purpose I would see, is it has more value, but I could not be accurate.
So my question is, do these local benchmark assessments, are they part of our PLCs on Wednesday? And that they collaborate together and they look at it and they work together to say, okay, we need this, we need this, what do we need to help those kids? That's how I put those two together. And just from my viewpoint, I think the teachers put more value in this than they do in the other assessment. And it also doesn't take as long as the other test. And they can use that data to make a change in their instruction. So, I would value that. I would get rid of the other, but I'm not the president. But maybe I'll talk to the Department of Education or DC. Can we save some money?
The answer to your question is yes, Kate. They're using PLCs. We also use PLCs, formative assessments, common formative assessments that teachers actually develop outside of the local benchmark assessments. So the local benchmark assessments are strategically placed 3 times throughout the year to help inform system-wide shifts that need to be made, and also classroom level shifts that need to be made. They're using our 100% meetings and our 20% meetings through our MTSS process. So thankfully, being still somewhat new to the organization, what I've heard is very much an appreciation for MClass and Akuda and MAPS, that it actually is useful for teachers. And so that's something that I can't take credit for. Others in this room certainly were a big part of bringing that about, and it's having a positive impact on our system.
So I was gonna ask you, so what benchmark assessments you mentioned some? Yeah, I think you also mentioned that, maybe that teachers that teach the same things put together a test that's a benchmark assessment. Is that-
So a local benchmark are the assessments that we give 3 times a year. They can be used in PLCs, they are used in PLCs, but in between that, PLCs also use exit tickets, right? Their own formative assessment, as thumbs up, thumbs down, to have conversations in PLCs. They might develop a common formative assessment. So me, you, and Brad, let's have the same 3 questions. Let's ask one of our students, what did we find out? So those are also part of a holistic, well-rounded assessment framework, if you will, or practices. And the benchmarks assessments are those dipsticks. And we also know that they're nationally normed, so they tell us something in terms of how we're doing compared to
What
others.
grade are those benchmarks that you mentioned?
Say that again.
What grade are those at? What grade are they given in?
They
Maps, which?
maps all the grades,
Okay,
all the grades.
through 7, 8,
Yeah,
9.
through 9, through
10.
10.
Okay.
STAR is the other assessment. We'll come back to that data piece later for ELA, but MAPS is 9 through 12. I mean, I'm sorry, MAPS is K through 12.
K-12.
Yeah, that's a map.
Yeah. So what content areas are benchmark?
English, so literacy, math, and then right now our English language learners are benchmarks.
So I mean, I'll just diverge here for a minute and say there's other courses that are taught, right? And you know, language arts and math always are assessed, but there's other areas that I hope that we're benchmarking, to be honest with you. And maybe that's a unit, the same unit test, or maybe that's how we used to do it. We give the same unit test, and so I guess what I'm saying is, if we're going to open up this benchmark conversation, let's open it up to all content areas and not just those 2 that we look at, because there's other areas.
There's a high school science teacher talking to
Well, I mean, at every grade level. I mean, honestly, you could do science benchmarks in the 4th grade and the 6th grade. I mean, I'm a science guy, but you could do social studies. I mean, you know what I mean? So I guess what I hope is that the district is doing some benchmark assessments that are maybe generated here in the district, but that they're valid assessments that we're using to gauge where students are in those other content areas. And we're not just doing math and language arts.
It's like a work sample, I think is what you're describing, and it could be a common assessment
Yeah.
that is developed by teachers.
Right.
But it's similar to the work sample process that is required. I think the key difference, especially once we get to the high school level, is that reading acquisition has a very discrete set of steps that a student undertakes to become a proficient reader. You start with phonemic awareness, you move into each individual phoneme and phonics associated with that, and then you move into fluency, and you have rate and accuracy associated with fluency. So all of those very discrete components can be measured individually. Once you get into high school, I've got physics, I've got chemistry, I've got forensic science, I've got environmental science, I have any number of science courses that I can take, geology, that aren't benchmarked the same way. And that's where those common assessments are critical. So if we have teachers that are collaborating around a specific class, for them to be able to, in their PLCs, say, we want students to learn these 5 things, and we're going to ask these 3 questions to assess their knowledge and skill, now we can compare how students are progressing. And that's the work that the teaching and learning department is doing with our high school staff, all teachers, to help them develop the skill set and then the tools to facilitate those assessments. Kind of getting a little in front of you there, Arturo, sorry.
Could I ask then too, so right now, with regards to the different content areas, is it just grades that really are the way that we're able to see where kids are in some of the science classes? Like, would that be really the only way that we can see that?
In those unique science classes, yes, so their grades are standard-based grades, so how they are doing is graded standards. Yes, so different standards for different classes.
And I would just say that, I know they're normed, to the materials you talked about, but the fact that they're, the Forest Grove gives a test and maybe 3 of the same history teachers or science teachers give an exam because they all teach the same course. I guess I wouldn't discount their assessment because it's not normed to another district. Tiger,
Absolutely.
or Hillsborough or Beaverton or any other district. I don't think it has to be, but it's of value. So I guess what I'm saying is that the teachers' assessments and courses is really valuable. And what they put together to assess their student knowledge is really, really valuable.
But you might want to make sure, like, if Paola had me for language arts and you for, a different language arts class, or that language arts team
Yes,
is able to show consistent,
yeah, it's
at
the
least
same.
in some capacity.
Yeah,
Maybe it's just
absolutely.
one thing at the end of the term.
Absolutely, and that's one of the essential outcomes of the effective PLC, right? That alignment's there,
Yeah.
that they're actually looking at student evidence, comparing.
That's been a practice for
Yeah,
years.
a long time.
No,
And something that's still very valuable, right? Especially when done well. So we do want to show you a few data sets because, as we mentioned earlier, OSAS isn't going away, and it does serve a purpose, right? And it does serve a purpose for our system. And as we've talked with leaders in the organization, as it rolls out, every year in the papers and those types of things, we don't want to overreact to OSAS and all of a sudden start teaching with the test and not thinking, just focusing on that. We also don't want to ignore it, right? We've got to be in a healthy place in the middle here. We also can't dismiss it completely because it does give us some valuable information, and Suzanne's going to share examples of that.
Yeah, as I mentioned before, going backwards on these assessment outcomes is not ideal. Placing the right emphasis on it is important and striking that balance between this state assessment and then the benchmark assessments. But one thing that you can do with OSAS that, this is how I use it, so I'll only speak for myself. OSAS is way up here at the 40,000 foot level. It's a overview of how the whole system is doing. It doesn't tell me anything about how Enrique's classroom is doing. But from a system perspective, I can drill into specific assessments for specific grade levels. So this is grade 3, but it's a 3-year comparison of the standards within grade 3. So those high-level categories of reading, writing, listening, and then research and inquiry. Those are the 4 different areas that comprise the overall reading score when you look at OSAS. So when I drill into that measurement, what I'm looking at here is where are we doing better, where are we staying the same, where might we be declining, and then in terms of levels 1, level 2, level 3, level 4, are there any hot spots I need to be aware of? And so what I see when I look at this is that for last year's OSAS, we, at the 3rd grade level, saw improvements in 3 of the 4 domains, reading not so much. So what that tells me is when I then go into classrooms and I'm observing teachers and walking with principals, one of the things I want to pay particular attention to is what does reading instruction look like? Not reading holistically, but when it gets right down to the components of reading instruction, I want to pay particular attention to that because that declined last year according to these outcomes, these measurements. Again, it doesn't tell me what's taking place in the classroom, but across our whole system, that's something that I want to pay attention to. And then if I'm looking down below with this cross-sectional report, I can see where most of our students are scoring at that level 1. And right now, that's in the writing area. So although we saw improvements overall in the writing score, we still have a significant number of students that are scoring at level 1. So again, when I go into classroom spaces, that's something that I'm aware of and something that I'm looking for and having conversations with teachers and principals about. There's not enough here for me to draw any conclusions. There is enough here for me to ask more questions. And that's how I use these data. Next slide, please. Here's another way that you can, yes, sir.
So when you look at that data, like at 3rd grade, does the district get the number of students that opted out for the test? Do we get record, do we know what that number is? Because I'm assuming the number in 3rd grade would be a lot less kids opting out than at the high school level. That's just an assumption.
Correct.
So do we get those numbers?
We track those numbers. I don't have them offhand, but we
I'm
do.
not asking you for them. I'm just wondering if, okay.
Yeah, we do have those numbers. One of, to be very candid with this group, one of my frustrations is that our OSAS results are based on a denominator of the entire student body and not the number of students that took the test. So when we get the results back and it says 36% of the students were at or above benchmark, that's 36% of the entire student body, not 36% of the students who actually took the test.
That pretty much.
That's crazy.
That pretty much.
That's absolutely crazy.
So that's a frustration of mine, and it's part of state
Oh, you should have
conversation.
said that.
No, that's crazy.
That's just crazy.
It's a little nutso, but it's important to
Absolutely.
know that when you look at the assessment results, because that puts it in a different context. The other thing that I look at here, this is another way of just getting that real high-level overview of, is there any domain that I need to pay particular attention to when I walk into a school environment? So what I'm looking for are where you see those minus signs. A plus sign means even if we're below, we're doing better. Equal sign means we're status quo. If I'm seeing minus signs on that table that you see there on the right-hand side, then those are targets that now when I walk into a classroom and I am looking for that reading or writing skill, I might be paying particular attention to reasoning evidence. And do students know how to, within their writing or within their reading, show reasoning and then evidence for their thought process? So again, at a very high level, this gives me something to focus on when I enter into classroom spaces and I'm interacting with teachers and principals. It doesn't sideline the scope and sequence that we have in place. It doesn't sideline the practices that we are working on with teachers in terms of our professional learning plan. But having this in my mind gives me an anchor point where I may be able to say to a principal, hey, I noticed when I was in the classroom these things, and here's some coaching you might be able to provide to the teacher. So I wanted to show you this because for all the reasons we've discussed, OSAS has problems. But at a very high level, at a system level, there are still some gleanings that can come from this if we look at the data in these ways.
Similarly, we are able to use the data to kind of look at those trends over time, right? And this is that cohort data that we have asked for in the past and we wanted to bring to you tonight. This is current seniors, how they've done as 11th graders. By the way, last year they were tested as 11th graders. Due to COVID, they hadn't been tested since they were in 18, 19 when they were in 6th grade. So a bit of a gap between 6th grade, COVID, and testing again as 11th graders in ELA. So this is their trend. And the top line is the state as a whole. The bottom line in green is how we compare, how our current seniors compare. Interesting, right? That although we were lower in the early grades, by the junior year, we were pretty much where the state is. And we had a similar trajectory and actually caught the state at the end. That's not a story that comes out when the newspapers share our scores, right? And the fact that we have dual language programming, that many of our students, we know and predict, and the program that they're in is in Spanish, and when they test in 3rd and 4th grade, it's in English. So that gap is 100% predictable for us.
You say that again?
That are in our dual language program, which is 2 full schools.
Right.
And also a strand.
Right.
And I'm not sure where we're at 15,
They
16.
assess in English.
We assess in English.
Wow.
And yet we have a very intentional, and we believe the right programming for those kids to catch up to their peers after the 8th grade.
Right.
But we don't see that we can predict, just based on what we chose to do as a district, which we believe is the right thing, that they will not perform as high as those not in dual language programs.
That makes sense.
And so, again, this is a data set that we thought we wanted to bring to you tonight as something different. Math, same cohort of students, current seniors, as it compares to the state. Again, not where we want to be by any means in terms of the percent of students meeting. Again, this is OSAS, so we know there's some limitations there. But a very similar trend to the state, and actually we are about the state average there as 11th graders. Typically what we do is we bring to you those bar graphs. We wanted to show you this line graph, very different, a little different way to look at it. Thoughts or questions before we go on to local benchmark?
So my question is, what is the State Department, what is the Department of Education in Salem looking at this trend? What are they saying?
They're not.
They're not.
No, the state metrics are reported in individual cohorts. Now, the state is working on line graphs similar to this in their new visualizations, but it will be the cohort for years 21-22, a different cohort for year 22-23, a different cohort for year 23-24. It will show overall scores for each of those individual cohorts, but it doesn't show trajectory over time for a single cohort. So it is a different story that the state tells by reporting individual cohort data. It still tells us something about a system overall. It may not be what people infer from the data. I don't think it is. I think there's a different story that you can read in the data. I think our story is contained within the data that we're about to look at. We have plenty of data points that show us that, to Arturo's point, our youngest students, many, if not most of whom, start speaking a language other than English, or they're simultaneous bilinguals and they're learning a preponderance of their time in Spanish, they do start behind on these English assessments. And by behind, I don't think they really are, but we're assessing them in English. By the time they're in high school, we have evidence that they catch up with their peers across the state, and we have some metrics where they outperform their peers across the state. And that's consistent with decades of multilingual research that shows that that multilingual brain is an academic asset. So there's good research for this programming that we have in place, but it takes many years for students who are learning in a multilingual environment to catch up and in many cases surpass their monolingual peers. Do you want to add anything to that?
So is this an argument for the state legislators to look at and say, you know, look at these scores, we need more money because the system is not supporting the needs of our kids and our teachers?
Is your question, if I could rephrase that, are you asking if our legislators intentionally look at single cohort data to skew their decisions around funding?
Well, I look at that, and if I was a legislator, I'd say, I need to support more money for education to help the schools. You know,
That would be so great if that's really how the responses would go. I mean,
Well, I
I
mean,
think you would get a mix, I think you would get a mix, well, I mean, we'll talk legislators.
I mean, I'm thinking when you see data numbers, it says a whole different, for me, when I see numbers, that means something totally different than I just say, well, our schools are down. I mean, but when you see something like this, it says, how come, why? What are their needs? What can we do? I mean, those are, if I was a legislator, that's what.
Are you gonna run?
No, don't touch my husband.
But I think we'll talk, I think we are gonna eventually talk separately about a work session around that, but yes, Kate, to your point, like, I think it's gonna be more about how does each district want to be able to bring their data and their story to their legislators to say what, and what is that message? And right now, I would say there are legislators who need to hear and see specifically from districts what that is, and it would be nice if districts were coordinating, as we've been talking about, what is the message, what are the common themes we see in that data, but I'm getting into a separate section, but.
I think it'd be a great conversation in the future. How we talk about it matters and how we talk to our legislators matter. I do want to spend a couple of minutes here just to give you a snapshot of the fall interim assessments. So if you remember, I came to you last year and said, hey, we got a new assessment tools. Here's the baseline data. I'm going to come back to you next year and we'll be able to take the fall benchmark data and kind of see how we compare. What's our starting point? Are we starting at the same place? Are we improving? And this is English, so this is ELA, M-Class, ELA. The top line is where our students are at the start of this year, this fall, after this year's benchmark. The green line is where we started last year. So this is what we would want to see. We'd want to see that our students are starting at a better place than they were the fall before in literacy, right? And so my hope is the more we stick to it, the more we refine, the better we get in our literacy adoption and our practices and our data processes, that we will only see this continue to be a trend. That next year we'll have a different color line that'll be higher than the blue line. That, to me, shows progress in our system. Yes, is it 14% too low? Absolutely. But is our baseline continuing to improve every year? So we can say in our literacy and English, in every grade except for 6th grade, that we are starting, and 5th grade, that we're starting at or above where we were the year before.
So are the 4th graders the one that were in COVID the first year, COVID, the 4th graders?
Yes, the
4th and 5th?
4th and 5th graders were the kids that were the COVID kids. So to your point, we see our younger grades progressing a little bit better, right? So that was an interesting piece that we wanted to share with you tonight. This is Spanish. So we talked earlier about our kids that are in our dual language classes learning Spanish first, how they did in our local Spanish benchmark assessment. This was a little bit of a quandary for us. It was really interesting. It raised more questions than answers, but still want to share it with you, right? We want to get to a place where that trend line's better. Kinder and first, for some reason, didn't perform as well, but second and third are at or above where they were in the past, but last year at this time. And so we're trying to figure this out. We're not sure why this is the case, but that's the power of local benchmarks. We're able to dive deeper in these assessments and find out what skills kids may be lacking grade to grade, okay? This is STAR English, 7 through 12. Big jump. Now, in a positive, but I also want to give some context here. If you remember last year, I came to you and said that we're struggling with implementation of our STAR assessment at the middle school and high school. There was a lot of distrust with STAR, a lot of lack of understanding of the value of STAR and how it helps us inform instruction. Last spring, we spent a lot of time with English teachers at the secondary level with training around STAR. So come this fall, giving the first benchmark, we saw a significant increase in the STAR assessment, which is good, but also we don't know yet, right? We don't know, it's great we're in a better starting place, but let's see how we do over time. So I wanted to share that with you. I will say, however, at the middle school level, there was a lot more buy-in in STAR, and when they saw these results, they were super excited about it, right? That our kids are coming to us at a little stronger level, okay? Again, power of local benchmarks, right?
Arturo, how do the kids get feedback from their teachers specifically or to parents? Do they see any of this in a kid-friendly?
Yeah, so what we started to do last year was actually send home family reports. So especially at the younger grades, they're going out during conferences for MAPS and for M class. So not so much STAR at the secondary level. There are family reports. I received mine as a parent. I was able to see how my daughter grew in math, and it actually gave me specific things that I can do at home to help her without needing a textbook or those types of things. Those are super powerful, and I'll share an example with the board because I think these assessment tools are really providing more than just the data, right? Just to move us along, this is K6 math. This is, depending on the grade, we're performing better, we're performing lower. The trend overall is downward. Keep in mind that MAPS was new last year for the first time. And we have a new math curriculum this year, specifically 5 through 12. So we're in a bit of in between right now. We would hope to see advancements in this area. 7th through 12th grade math assessments as well. Less variability, if you will, a similar trend across the board. So, in the interest of time, I kind of flew through. I have packets for each of you to take home tonight with the exact same slides so that we can dive in deeper. But what are some closing thoughts around what we saw tonight around local benchmarks?
I just would say, what are the next steps? That would be my goal.
Yeah, absolutely. So what we do with our local benchmark assessments in the fall is we hold 100% meetings that have already been held this year, where teachers are sitting down looking at the data of their kids in their classrooms, and they're deciding what are the tier 1 instructional focuses we're going to have this year. What are we going to do for every kid in our grade based on what the local benchmark assessments tell us? right? What are the specific skills that they're lacking? And how are we going to adjust instruction for our first graders, for example? We'll also use the data of the 20% needs. It drives our groupings for interventions. What are the students that we're going to support in intervention in the classroom? What are the students outside of the classroom in small groups and otherwise? And so that's happening for literacy and for math. And so it's already being used. It's already being used, and it will be, when we do the second assessment in the winter, we will adjust those plans based on student growth.
I'll add one additional layer is we are starting next month quarterly monitoring conversations with our school leaders. So this will be new. We're going to meet with school leaders as a team and engage them in their own data. So not this overall district view, but what's taking place, for example, at Cushing Elementary. And look not only at their benchmark data, but also some other metrics that are, we think, really important in the overall evaluation of the health of a school. So attendance data, how are they managing their fiscal resources year to date? We're going to be engaging in those conversations 3 times per year as a way to coach our colleagues where they may need some coaching, provide resources that we might learn during the conversation they need some additional support. But also for us, it's an opportunity to hear directly from our leaders in that space what's working really well for them that we could maybe scale to other environments, and what is not working well that we as leaders may need to change ourselves so that our schools and our school leaders have what they need to be successful.
So I would just say that was helpful. I mean, it gave us some context. I think, at least for me, you know, in a long time, it's just whatever we do, that we stay on the train and there's continuity. You know, the flip-flopping back and forth is just, hasn't gotten it done. So, and I do like the way it's structured right now, and you can hardly wait to look at it in 5 years to see what kind of progress we made.
Same.
Yeah. So don't screw it up.
Stole my line. Yeah, absolutely. Thank you all for the conversation tonight. Very much appreciated.
Thank you.
All right, I think that'll do it. We're gonna move over to the dais and do a little switcheroo. Do I have to gather at the end? All right, the October 22nd, 2024 Forest Grove School District Board of Directors meeting is called to order at 6:35 p.m. We'll start with roll call. Brad?
I'm here.
Mark? Here. Kate? Here. Val is absent tonight, and I am here, and Howard is here. All right, we can all rise for the flag salute.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
All right, I'll entertain approval for tonight's agenda.
So moved.
Second?
All in favor?
Aye.
All right, student representative report, Paula.
Good evening, everyone. So homecoming season is officially over, so we'll be able to catch a break over at the high school. I wanted to highlight that this year we were able to have a couple of alumni participate in the parade, so that was really nice to be able to have them back. And just in general, say thank you to all the community for having joined us at that. Another thing that I wanted to highlight was our Mario Kart tournament was very successful because the winner won little Mario Kart console. That was probably why. But yeah, super excited that we were able to finish it successfully and that it went well. We didn't win at the football game, but it's okay because we're winners at heart, so it doesn't matter. For the next thing that he's working on, we're working on the preparations for the trick-or-treat in event, which will be on Wednesday, October 30th from 5:30 to 7 p.m. A couple of clubs are planning some fundraisers for the next month, so as I get more details, I will go ahead and share that with you all. Marching band brought home 4 trophies after they competed at the 35th Annual Sunset Classic at Sunset High School. One was for high visual, the second one was for high general effect, the third one for high music, and then it was the first place in the 2A division. Just as a reminder, Mariachi has their benefit concert on the 25th, and that's at Forest Grove High School. Doors open at 6:30 p.m. and the show is at 7. And then also, Ballet Folklorico has an upcoming performance, and that will be November 1st at NAM to 7 p.m. Last night was the boys varsity soccer senior night, and they won 6-0. Last night, girls volleyball also won in their game against McMinnville, and the score was 3-1. And tomorrow is their senior night, and which is also the game for the conference championship, and it's a home game against Newburgh. And Thursday this week will also be cross-country senior night. So that is all I have.
Thank you. We're moving board reports to the front. This will be new, so that it won't be at the end. And it's board chair report, but I think it's just going to be board report. This is an opportunity for the board to share information and updates, to provide input for future board items, and discuss or report on any committee meetings they have attended. Tonight, I did want to talk about the legislative roadshow and a little bit more building on what we just talked about in the work session. But a couple different things have kind of all come together in the past couple weeks. One was just communication coming from lots of different parts of our community. I received a really amazing email from a teacher in our district that mentioned the article that had just come out that we spoke about in the work session. And he sort of provided like some insights about a little bit of what you talked about, Mark, at the last meeting, how, you know, what that article portrayed was not the full picture. And I responded and shared that we are working on some of the things we're working on, like the spotlight and bringing forth to the board itself and more to the public about all of the pieces that are happening in this district that are so strong and the work that teachers are doing. But I also acknowledge that is a story that we want to tell, and I think that work session was excellent. Arturo, you did a great job of, if anyone's just watching now and you get a chance to go back and watch that work session, I think we had a really good discussion, and you did a great job of displaying all the different pieces and adding some context about where we're headed. But that email happened, and then I was at Oktoberfest working the vision booth for the city, and as you all know, lots of people give city comments about the schools and vice versa, and sometimes we hear things about the city, and so
helping our community know where those roles fall and how we're partnering together. But again, the comments that I heard were lots of questions about growth and people concerned about how are our schools going to handle what they're seeing, and then questions about development. That same theme at the City Visioning Committee, which is at City Hall, and it's about 25 stakeholders, a couple district, David and Eileen, I think, are part of that. There was a parent there who again brought up the same question about growth and class, what we're seeing in classrooms, and then the final piece was at the city councilor debate, and there was a community member there who mentioned a few things about schools that they had heard, but were pieces of information that I felt like needed to be corrected. And so actually he and I are gonna have coffee this Thursday, and what that all leads to is sort of a theme that I've been hearing even when I was on city council about growth and the future of the city and all of that, and what does that look like. So a couple things happened. One of the things is we came to leadership and I sort of explained some of these things I'm hearing, and I asked if we could work together as a board to come up with maybe an at-a-glance, a one-pager, which you have. I'm just passing this out now. I think we're going to link it to the packet. It's just a draft, but I believe Eileen and Dr. West and David Warner and the whole cabinet kind of came together and created this, actually, which I feel like is going to be really, really helpful for me in a conversation. And that was really what I talked about, is I want to make sure when I'm in the community that I can interrupt conversations with correct information, and also that we can represent, what's happening in our school district in real time. So I'm passing it out to the board now so we can think on what you see here. I'm going to kind of use it as an anchor for my coffee conversation on Thursday, just to see how it comes across and get some feedback from a community person. Is it too much information? Is it just right? Were there questions that he has that aren't addressed here? And then this is just kind of an evolving document that we maybe change or we use for different things that we're a part of. And that came on the heels of another conversation, which is the other sheet, which is a draft of legislative priorities. And again, we'll link this to the packet, but conversations that we've been having at OSBA, and in particular with people on the OSBA board in Hillsborough and Tigard specifically, and we've been talking about how, to your point, Kate, in the work session, how can districts come together around the data that we're seeing, and how can we present data to our legislators with a focused ask? OSBA's, we heard at the Legislative Roadshow, which we attended, the OSBA focus is funding, it's pretty broad, accountability, which has yet to be defined, and the third one was attendance. I had a specific concern over the attendance focus, because I think, and we'll talk about that maybe in a broader session, but again, our conversation in leadership was, could we put some legislative priorities together in a sort of a user-friendly sheet here, and then could we work with neighboring districts to align language and actually even align priority? And again, that's the broader work, that's the district, that's the union piece, getting feedback for, is this something that our community can get behind when we're lobbying? So that's the second piece that you see here. It's things like establish an accurate method for, oops, I'm in the old version. Establish an accurate method for calculating the true cost of schools, correct past and suspend future unfunded mandates, increase special education funding,
Consistently fund academic summer and after-school programming for all districts every time. It's the batteries. Fund early childhood screening and intervention, and exercise caution in creating new restricted grant programs. Those are some themes. And when we've been partnering with other districts, we are finding that I've checked in with the Rural Caucus. The Rural Caucus felt like those priorities aligned with what they were also saying to their legislators. But I think where all this is headed is a second a broader work session about all of these pieces. One of the comments made at the legislative dinner, there was a discussion around, yes, it would be nice to align language and focus, and yet there's still some discussion around districts maybe feeling like they might have separate areas of focus. What we're hearing from legislators, pretty loud and clear, is legislators are hearing all kinds of things from different districts about the needs and the priorities. And the second thing, Kate, to your point, and I'm going to be real honest about this, we're actually meeting with Rep. McLean, and we'll be meeting with Senator Solomon, and we know our representatives know schools and know our district, but there are not a great deal of legislators that really know and understand schools. So while we have some legislators that are saying, we know this needs to be funded, there's increasing costs that we also need to be covering. You'll hear in the news that the governor is expanding. It will not be enough to cover the needs for a district to operate. Some legislators understand that at a level which would be, yes, we need to fully fund so that the schools have what they need. We will see outcomes. There are legislators that are saying, we're not really set on giving that funding unless you can show us the results. And then competing right now with transportation, who also has a system that needs to be probably overhauled and lots of good conversations. So I think the more we can be aligned in what we're asking with our local representatives, there's some power in that maybe haven't occurred before. Becky Timchuk is someone who really led the lobbying, and we really coalesced around the Student Success Act, but that was a long time ago. She said that was really one of the times where all the districts came together for a common purpose and speaking with one voice, and that got put into place. And then, of course, after that, changed a little bit after the year or two that it went in place. So I wanted to sort of give an overview, hand these out to the board, let you think on it, work with it this week, and maybe we come back together to refine and get your thoughts on if this is the way we go, if we want to go a different way. Okay, that's it for me, I think. Or Brad, Mark, Kate, anything to add for the board?
I just want to say, I think this would be great if the Washington County School Board members align themselves with this. I think it would be easier for the legislators to understand, instead of getting so many different things that people want. I think generally, I mean, everybody knows that we need more money for special education. We just do. And that's whether it's rural area or it's, Hillsborough or Beaverton or Portland. So I really appreciate this being together like this. I think it's going to really help you go everything. So thank you. And I like this too. This is really good. The only question I had, I think I might have sent it to you, Dr. West, is I wonder if we should put down, that next year we may see that we have to cut teachers or cut staff.
Yeah,
And I don't know if this is the appropriate place or not, so that's why I sent that short note.
I sure hope we don't have to do that next year. We are going to provide a budget update here very shortly, and there are some important metrics to pay attention to in that update. One of those metrics you see here on this at a glance. We are spending our savings, and that's something that we need to be very careful with. And it will eventually run out at the rate we're currently spending. So we'll need to do some reductions, I think, in the coming years. But there are other metrics as well that are impactful to our overall financial health that in just a little bit we're going to spend some time talking about.
Yeah, I was just gonna say, I think the legislative priorities is good, but you said something that I think you do every time when you talk about money for schools, which is, what have you done with the money? What have you done with the money? That's the legislature will say that. And then you put that up against the OSAS scores. It's not good enough. I don't know how you overcome that. It's really frustrating.
Well, I can tell you that I think a way to kick that door open and get in there is that the OSBA board only has a couple of us that actually were ever teachers. Many of the school boards have people on the boards who aren't or weren't teachers. This board has probably the most experience in the world of teaching, and we have a very active community. So, and this is just me speaking personally, we're gonna need to push back on that ask. Is this in the no surprises part? This is my opinion. I would like to see us as a community be able to push back to that. And that's part of the conversation I think I'll be bringing to our local representatives, but believe me, I'm saying it loud and clear at the state meeting, because we can see, even in the work session today, if people at the legislature want to see what we're doing, well, welcome in, come on in to how hard people are working. Come to this work session where you see the trends and the focus and how we're changing. Come and understand how people can only move as far as they're allowed to. We need the support to be able to give people the ability to teach. That is not a message that is getting through to a legislator. It's coming from, I'm sure it's coming from COSA, although I can't speak from COSA, which is the superintendent's group. It's not really coming from the OSB directors. It's coming from the OSBA exec board a little bit. But that is the conversation we're having everywhere. So I think there's an opportunity, and we'll talk in the work session too, about building out an advocacy plan where you have parents in this district and community members aligned around the message. So the stories we're presenting, which should be intentional, are the stories that are showing we're doing the work and we're getting the results we need, and pointing to where we get the results. This is why we got the results, because we had the funding we needed for these programs. But that's not really getting all the way through to the people that are making that decision. I think there's power in the voices of people who know and can push back. Because some of the pushback is things like, well, someone in the legislature, is working on the free lunch focus. Now, that, is important, but we need all of us thinking bigger picture about what we're really needing. So I don't know if I'm clear with that. That wasn't a great example, but so that's what I look forward to with this board, is figuring out, like, we're gonna need to go to Salem, and we're gonna need to be talking to representatives other than just our own to be able to counter that message. And it's very frustrating, and I don't know, you'll hear there's districts that are doing more with less, but again, you have to point out the specific needs of the district. So one of the things that happened at this legislative dinner is we talked about what does accountability mean? And that's the discussion, this accountability group at the governor's office, including superintendents and people from our district, and are trying to figure out what is the accountability piece. And it was Dan from ESD that said, well, how about accountability being that you actually give us the money we need, that you raise the sped cap so we can fully fund the needs for these kids. That's the accountability. And it was kind of a moment, because I think that's the two sides. We're saying to the legislator, we don't need to show you why you need to give us the money. You need to fund our schools. And then let's see where we are. So, I'm getting a little, I'm gonna stop. I am, some passion is showing, but yeah, there's a great discussion to be had around it. And I don't know that everything I said is necessarily accurate, or those were just off the top of my head, how you make the difference, but
Okay. Well, I'm gonna pass it over. Am I? Yes, Dr. West. Okay, please.
Just briefly, I want to put a period at the end of all the sentences we just heard. In my experience, talking with people around the state, there is a lot of alignment around a very few issues, which you see here on this legislative priorities draft. There are some regional differences. We're a good example of that. Timber is important to us, and there is some risk to timber monies that currently go to schools right now, and so that's high concern, less so to Forest Grove than to other districts where a significant portion of their revenue comes from timber. But there are very few of those regional specific issues. If you look across the state, we are all talking about the same things. We need to have enough money to provide services to students who are being served with IEPs and 504s and high-cost disability needs. We have 108 different funding sources in this state for K-12 education. Every one of them has their own rules, their own funding allocation process, their own reporting process. Many of them have a different timeline than other grants. The administrative burden is significant. So there's a lot of, I think, across the state alignment in regard to the things that we would like to ask of our legislators. So more to come on this. We wanted to put this in front of you to let you know that these conversations are happening across the state. They're happening in groups like OSBA and COSA, and we will try to coalesce around a few important issues in the coming weeks.
That was a lot more succinct. No, it's back to you. We're gonna move on to superintendent report.
Okay, superintendent report.
Thank you.
I was thinking just a moment ago that I might need to start arm wrestling our student advisor for who gets to say what. Because as you were talking, I'm like, well, okay, I'm not going to say that. But a few things that I can add, starting with some upcoming events. We also have a choir concert coming up at the high school on the 29th of October at 7 p.m. So for those of you interested in attending, that'd be great. NAMS has the Spooktacular concert on the 30th of October, 6:30 p.m. And then for board members that are interested in attending the OSBA conference but haven't indicated that yet, there's still time to sign up. A couple just district updates. Friday was homecoming, as we heard about. The one thing that I want to highlight that wasn't already highlighted was during the parade, I think many of the youth of the Forest Grove community had early Halloween. The haul that some of these kids walked away with, their bags of candy, their buckets of candy, was pretty tremendous. But what really my takeaway was from the parade is just how much fun people were having. Us who were walking in the parade, of course, but the community as well. They were cheering as we went past, they were high-fiving, they were engaged with each of the different floats and especially the students, and that was just tremendous fun to see. Also this week is America's Safe School Week, and I want to highlight for the board and for others who may be watching that one of the things that we can be thankful for is that the Forest Grove School District community funded a bond in 2022. We are using about 1/4 of the overall bond resources for security enhancements. And we are using those monies to do what we refer to as layers of deterrence. So we are putting in place fences, for example, where we didn't have fences. We are upgrading our security systems. We're adding vestibules where it makes sense. We are adding video doorbells so that the office staff can see who it is that wants to enter the school before allowing them in. Each one of these in and of themselves is important. Taken as a whole system, it adds layers of effective security for each of our buildings that it's really important for us to have in place. So we're very thankful to the community for funding that bond. We would not be able to do the enhancements that we're actually undertaking without those monies. Also on Monday, we're going to advertise the 3 open budget committee seats that we have available for our spring adoption process, so I wanted to put that on your radar. 2 of the seats are a 3-year position and 1 is an alternate position. The alternate is a 1-year term and is not a voting member of the committee, but being an alternate is a good way for someone to be introduced to the budget process if they're interested and just like to see what it's all about. So put that on your radar. It'll be advertised. The applications will be open until November 25th. And we will have information on our website about how to submit an application for those who are interested. Last thing I want to point out is that you have in your board packet 3 reports. You have a report around elementary PE minute plan. You have a report around Tom McCall PE minutes plan. And you have a report around the Menstrual Dignity Act for students. Those are towards the back of your board packet. The reason these are in your board packet is that it is the time of year where we report on Division 22 standards. For each of those 3 areas, we are not compliant with Division 22 standards. As a reminder, Division 22 encompasses all of the requirements that schools must meet to be considered a standard school district by Oregon statute. A lot is covered in there: HR, teaching and learning, diploma and graduation requirements, health and safety. It's very comprehensive what's included in Division 22. And once a year we go through as a school district and we look at all of those different requirements and ask ourselves, are we compliant? How do we know? And then in the areas where we're not compliant, we need to develop a plan. So elementary PE minutes we've talked about before. We do have what I will call a bridge plan in place. The Department of Education allows us to include movement minutes in content areas like music. And so we will do that in the short term. In the long term, we probably need to have conversations about a longer elementary school day. The districts that are meeting their elementary PE minutes consistently have a longer school day than we do, in some cases by 30 minutes or more. So we'll undertake that examination in the coming years, but in the short term, we have a plan for how to be compliant. The third area is this Menstrual Dignity Act. When we conducted an audit to evaluate if we were meeting all of the requirements related to this, we learned that we had dispensers that weren't full, had no product in it. We were missing dispensers in a couple of areas. We were missing labels in different languages. Some of the dispensers didn't allow for privacy. So those things need to be corrected, and we have a plan in place to correct those over the course of this next year. What questions may I answer for you about any of that? Okay, then I'll turn it back to you, Chair.
Okay. All right, Forest Grove Education Association report.
Nothing to report at this time.
Nothing to report. All right. Unscheduled public appearance. Consent agenda. The consent agenda is made up of routine, non-controversial items to be voted on under one motion. Are there any items within the consent agenda a board member or the superintendent wishes to discuss separately? Seeing none.
So moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
And then presentations, budget update, if Eileen. Welcome, Eileen.
Good evening. So tonight we have the fall budget update. We are going to go over not intended, sorry. Okay, so today we're going to go over the general fund cash flow update, both for the final 23-24, where we ended post-audit, and then the 24-25 forecast is what we see today for the general fund. We'll briefly go over grants for 2024, and then we'll finally talk about first grades in this legislative planning and starting to look at budget season for this upcoming budget year. Looking at the 23-24 final general fund budget update, this report is in a similar fashion as what we've shown in the past. The top section is the resources, the middle section is the expenditures, and then at the bottom is the ending fund balance for the year. It shows 2 years of historical data, the adopted budget for 23-24, the actuals for 23-24, and then over to the right, it shows how it compared to the adopted budget and how it compared to the cash flow that we presented last year. And so ending fund balance ended at almost $17.3 million, 21%, which is in alignment with where we ended last year, at 21.4% last year. If we look at it compared to the budget report in the spring, it's $1.4 million higher, increasing the percentage of ending fund balance by 1.86%. There's a couple of things that happened between April and closing out the year. We had higher local resources, which included our interest, our indirect rate, and our final property tax reconciliations for the year. Then our state resources were up by $561,000, and there's two components to that. One is our forest revenue came in almost double what we received the last quarter of the prior year, and our ending state school fund reconciliations that we get in May each year. So those are the two factors contributing to that one. And then when we look at our expenditures by major object, our salaries and benefits is significantly less than what we had projected. And that's because at the end of the year, we are trying to utilize as much of the grants as we can, so we're not leaving any money on the table. And so all of our underused grants, we're trying to use those with what expenditures we have in the general fund that qualify for those grants. So we did shift a significant amount at the end of the year. However, we also came to you in June and asked for $1 million transfer to the PERS reserve. And what that's gonna do is help support us, not this next biennium, but the biennium after, when we're gonna see another jump in our PERS rates, along with our final PERS rail debt payments. So we're kind of double hit that biennium, and this will help support that. Any questions on where we ended the year? Okay. When we look at our final appropriations for last year, each year we have the board and budget committee adopt our appropriation maximums for each major fund and function. There's two places where we went over our appropriations, and you will hear about this when our auditors come in January also. But in our grants instruction, we went over by $216,000, and that's part of that usage of those grants at the end of the year. And then our food service actually went over by $240,000. It's a good thing because we went 100% CEP last year. So when I look at our CEP numbers and our lunches served last year, we increased by 21%. 95,000 more lunches served last year than the year prior. So that's pretty significant. It is over expenditure on our budget appropriation, but it is a good thing. All right, our current year, 24-25. Same format as the last one, except you'll have 2 years of historical data, the current year's adopted budget, what's happened year to date through September 30th, what we project to remain between now and the end of the year, and then what that total looks like in comparison to the adopted budget. Overall, we are looking at $2 million over our adopted budget, ending at $11.7 million for our ending fund balance, or 13%. This is, the biggest contributor to this is the beginning fund balance. So what we just talked about in the last year, ending fund balance increase is rolling forward to our new year and what we're bringing forward to this year. So we'll see a $1.4 million increase in our beginning fund balance. We also have $381,000 additional in interest revenue and our high school gym for insurance reimbursement claim. And then 302,000 for the Oregon State School Fund adjustment with the new estimates that came out this summer. And then expenditures are pretty well in line. So any questions on the current year's forecast?
Eileen, was that fully reimbursed, the gym floor?
Minus our deductible, but yeah.
Okay, good.
And some of those expenditures are actually in last year. And so we won't see a significant increase in expenditures this year because it's making up for last year's spending.
Okay.
Okay, looking at our cash flow, it doesn't impact this year so much as next year, but our enrollment loss. Really wanted to talk about how we budgeted 5,500 students. Our actual came in 100 students less. It's 74 students less than the prior year. We budget primarily on floor funding, so it's not going to impact our state revenue this year or our cash flow this year, but it will impact us next year. And if we just look at 100 students plus the weights of 100 students, that's about 123 kiddos at the state school fund rate. It's almost $1.3 million in a loss in revenue that we're gonna walk into next year with. Did you have a question?
The PERS increase percentage.
2 more slides.
Oh, okay.
Okay, next up, I just wanted to do a quick review of our grant resources last year. 23-24, we received $22.6 million in grant resources. 9.3 million of that was federal. And then our top 10 grants are up here. So we have our student investment account at 6.2 million, ESSER at 3.8. That ESSER funds will go away. It sunsetted September 30th of this year, so we'll have a little bit left when we close out this year, but after that, those funds will expire. 3.6 million of that 3.8 is facilities and capital improvements for HVAC. So that's our district controls that we've done. We've done some air conditioning and air quality improvements in some of our buildings. So it is going to be a loss in resources, but it won't be a significant loss at the building level. There was only one FTE out of that 3.8, and that was our facilities tech. So just our top 10 grants for last year. Now I wanted to take just some time to go over a couple of key points for our legislative priorities or impacts our planning going into this budget season. Both of these are included in those flyers that were handed out earlier. Those one-pagers are talking points. But just to give a little bit of information about the governor's updated calculation for current service level, if we were to maintain the old calculation model, we would have received $585 million into the state school fund over and above what the last biennium was. So that's the regular current service model moving forward. With the updated calculation, it adds an extra $515 million into that state school fund pool. 3 things were changed in that model, and historically, the state school fund current service level was calculated based on a 50-50, assuming you're gonna receive 50% of that allocation in year 1, 50% in year 2, whereas we actually get funded on a 49-51. So we get 49% the first year and 51% the second year. So this new current service level model uses the same method that we receive the funds, 49-51. The other one is the adjustment in the compensation costs. It had a 20-year look back on compensation changes, and it shifted it to a 10-year look back. And then finally, the local property tax revenues, adjusting for the fluctuations of the 2 years in the biennium. Overall, that supports us significantly by about $2.5 million each year. So it's a pretty significant increase to us as a district and essential into going into this next biennium. The other one is ensuring that we're fully funding special education. That for us is about $3 million, and that moves us from a cap of 11% up to 15%. We're sitting just under that 15% at this time. And then fully funding high-cost disability. I think last year it was about a 40% reimbursement. This assumes a full reimbursement of high-cost eligible expenses. So between these two, it would be a significant impact to our district. PERS rates. Has to copy the last slide. Okay, so briefly about PERS rates, the next biennium, 25-27 biennium rates have been published. There's a few factors that are contributing to the increase in rates that we'll see on the next slide. One is the funded status went from 86% funded for the state UAL down to 77% funded. And then the other things are the investment under performance and the higher assumed payroll growth. So payroll costs and have increased much greater than what was in the prior assumptions. So based on that, our PERS rates are gonna go, this is from 2009 all the way to this upcoming biennium, but our PERS rates are gonna go from 19.02% to 23.58 for Tier 1, Tier 2, and 16.18% to 20.4% for observe. And this is percentage of labor costs. So overall, it's about a 4.4% increase on average between the two. If I apply that to our salaries that we have estimated for the next biennium, it's about $4.2 million, right off the top. So those increases in the state school fund that we just talked about are essential because that doesn't include anything to support the increase in first class.
Do you know how that percentage compares to other districts?
It's about a 5% increase statewide for many districts, so we're right underneath that, but.
And were they planning to fund for a 1 to 2% increase? I mean, have you heard that was what the plan was, for the state to assume a 1 or 2% increase, but now what's happened is it's actually higher?
No, I think they look at the total labor costs. I don't know if they look at PERS in particular and funding PERS individually. So this is one that will impact us. I don't know. Okay.
You have a question?
No, I'm thinking,
Okay.
Oh.
well, thank you, Rob.
There's nothing you can do
Didn't
about
hear any of
this.
that.
Yeah.
So, any questions on the PERS? So lastly, just want to talk about there we go. The things that we're going to continue to do over the next upcoming months is continue to monitor the legislative impacts, try to understand what's happening, advocate. We do have negotiations for both licensed and classified starting the first of the year. We have our budget planning that's already started, but will really kick off in January. And then just keep moving forward on making sure that we're monitoring what's happening and the long-term impacts. Questions?
Do the CFOs, do they advocate also through is there a separate group, right, that's sharing this in what way?
We have Oregon School Business Officials, so OASBO. It's similar to your guys' state group.
And what has the conversation been there around the PERS increases?
I think we're all in the same boat here.
Thank you, Eileen.
Thank you.
action items, contracted staffing services with Kim. Welcome, Kim.
The district has a need to fill a 1.0 speech language position, and we also would like to hire a speech language pathology assistant to help with some additional services needed and some workload issues. So we're requesting for action to spend up to $192,300 for the remainder of the 24-25 school year. And that would be current budgeted FTE converted into contracted costs. And that would include salary and benefits. The position for SLP is currently open and no applicants and has been open for almost a month.
Questions?
I think this is a yearly. I'm just thinking it's sort of Groundhog Day. It's yearly. Unfortunately. Okay. It is what it is, yeah.
I will add the addition of the SLPA, is due to some work that Kim and her team are doing to rethink support of our speech language pathologists for our students. So this is, we think, really necessary to ensure that we're meeting the needs of kids. And I'm looking forward to what comes out of the work that they're doing this year to rethink that process of assigning SLPs to students.
Do I have a motion to approve spending up to $192,300 converted from budgeted FTE for a 1.0 FTE speech language pathology position and a 1.0 SLPA position in student services for the remainder of the 2024-25 school year?
So moved. Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you, Kim. And I think there is no further business. This meeting is adjourned at 7:22.